Well, greetings. Mike Schutt here, your teacher. You probably recognize me. My friend Mark Bertrand with me today to talk about Don Quixote. So thanks for doing this.
Yeah, I'm sorry we could not meet in person because of the weather, but it's nice to be able to at least talk to you through video.
Well, what do you think about Don Quixote? Obviously, we did the really nice audio version, but it was a little tongue-in-cheek. But really, I mean, maybe the first question is, surely Cervantes is not really worried that people are going to read chivalric romances and then go around acting them out, and he really needed to write a 1,000-page book about this problem, right? He's not really doing that, although I have talked to these students about the danger of romantic comedies and how overexposure to those and believing those to be your reality will actually turn your mind to mush.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, there is a power to what we read, and a power to books, and I think certainly Cervantes would agree with that, but I will concede that Don Quixote is not a warning about the dangers of reading.
Good,
it's actually something more sophisticated than that. I think that he's using this example of the chivalric literature to demonstrate a couple of ironies. So yes, I think he's making fun of all of the sort of knightly romances and the values that come from them. But the reason why he is focused on that genre is that is the popular literature of his day. So although it's true there aren't a lot of Don Quixotes running around Spain at this time, I do think there are a lot of people who aspire to an ideal of knighthood or chivalry or gentlemanliness.
Gentlemanliness, yeah.
Right, and so as a result of that, when he's critiquing those ideas, he is critiquing his culture, and he's using humor to do it, to kind of show us how absurd it is sometimes when we imagine ourselves to be noble and just, when we actually are selfish and deluded.
So perceptions and reality,
right?
A critique of his culture and the sort of by-the-book gentlemanliness, or being this kind of person because this is the way it's supposed to be, whether cultural norms or some handbook of knighthood. Right, he's using that as a stand-in.
Right, and that's kind of the center of the comedy, is that he's taking what we know to be fiction and treating it like history and learning how to behave from that history, and that's the source of really another kind of a modern sense of humor. That's Octavio Paz says that Don Quixote invents the modern sense of humor in this book. Cervantes does. And what he means by that is that medieval humor was a sort of low humor that was like laughing at the humiliations of others. You know, someone trips and we all go, ha ha ha, that's really funny.
Yeah.
But here, the person we're laughing at is also someone we sympathize with and even can see ourselves in the role.
Or ought to see ourselves.
Right. And so we're laughing because of the fact that Don Quixote isn't what he thinks he is, and the world isn't what he thinks it is, and we often find ourselves in that same situation of having delusions about what we're really like, who we are, what our strengths are, or how the world works.
Yeah, one of your favorite places where he uses this history, the fiction of the chivalric romance fiction as an actual history is where he says, "Well, I can't complain." It's one of your favorite.
Don Quixote, even though he is a middle-class gentleman who's now enduring all sorts of privation, starvation, physical pain, he can't complain because in the histories, no knight-errant is ever recorded as having complained about the diet or anything like that. But in the histories, it never mentions that squires don't complain, right. So Don Quixote thinks it's okay for Sancho.
Yeah, Sancho, you go ahead and complain because it doesn't mention anything about squires not complaining.
Right, I love that.
That's pretty good. It's pretty good stuff. So, another thing that you've mentioned before that I didn't really think about is there is a little bit of concern, and just going back to the main point about this isn't about the dangers of reading or even about the dangers of romance, although it is a critique of the silliness of the ideas in some small way, but that's not the main thing he's poking a stick at. He's happy to use this as as his vehicle for satire.
Sure.
But you mentioned before that there is a concern about the dangers or frivolity of fiction. right?
Right.
That there's a move during this period in the world to have to justify why you would read fiction or poetry.
Right. In England in the 1500s, Edmund Spenser, Sir Philip Sidney, they have to defend poetry. They have to defend fiction to an audience that is really suspicious of why you would want to read things that are lies.
People make up.
Right, and we still have that today, right? There are engineers who wonder, why should I ever read fiction, because it's all
There's some
up.
students watching this video now wondering, why should I read fiction? Yeah.
Okay, well, I mean, this book is a great example of why you should do that. Even though the story is made up, this fiction is a way of finding a truth, a deep human truth that I would say you couldn't discover any other way. There's no test tube that would reveal to you the truth that Don Quixote is going to reveal.
Yeah, and it's funny because it's ironic in and of itself. The story itself,
Right.
taken at face value, could be seen as, see how dangerous it is to read fiction, when in fact it's the opposite.
Exactly.
Or almost, or could be almost the opposite. Let's say a couple things about some of the things to look for in Don Quixote, just in terms of reading literature. One would be the idea of a character foil.
Yes.
That Don Quixote, tall and thin, is clearly a foil to Sancho Panza, short and fat. But it's not just their physical appearance that are their physical appearances that are being contrasted by Cervantes. It's a lot of other things. And so as we read, we get insights into each of the characters because they're set up as foils by Cervantes. How does that work?
Right. So as you're reading the first 14 chapters, at the beginning you have Don Quixote, and then along the way Sancho Panza is introduced, and you'll notice there's a difference in the humor and what can be achieved.
What Cervantes can do with it.
Yes, because Sancho is like a mirror that can be held up to Don Quixote. He can talk to him about what he's doing, and they can kind of explain the way they see the world. That wouldn't happen if either one of them was on his own. So sometimes Sancho Panza can be the straight man to Don Quixote's madness, and occasionally it gets flipped around a little bit, and we see that Sancho is not exactly in his right mind all the time either. He's a character as well, but it's bringing them together that reveals that. So it's a powerful literary device. Essentially, we may identify with Don Quixote, but Sancho Panza gives voice to the questions that we have about his behavior.
Yeah.
And so we're able to get more information and know him better because of that relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. And Sancho is different enough from Don Quixote that he takes on a life of its own,
Yes.
an enjoyment for us as the
Right.
reader of getting to know Sancho as his own character and how different he is in contrast to Don Quixote. So it's a neat trick for an author to be able to put these characters in stark contrast, but use each of them to illuminate the traits and the character traits and the ideals even of the other. One other thing to look at, I think, in this book is Cervantes' use of metafiction or fiction within fiction, an overarching story that is already layered, and then stories within those stories that we'll see even more. We have a little glimpse of that at one point in the book, and it's revealed that Cervantes is trying to tell us that this isn't just something that he's made up. It's a story within a story with interesting layered sources, and we'll see even more of that as the characters begin to tell stories within the story. So we'll explain that, because there's one that the point at which he's having this very realistic battle with the Basque. I think it's the Basque.
Yes.
And that right in the middle of the battle something happens, and it's revealed that this is not just something. Well,
Right.
You tell.
In the very middle of the battle, you have this climactic moment where Don Quixote is about to bring his sword down onto the Basque, and the Basque is holding his weapon up to defend himself, and then the action stops. You get a freeze frame, and Cervantes says, well, this is where the manuscript ends. This is as much as we know about the story. And he actually has to go out and do some exploration in order to find some tale that finishes the narrative. And the tale that he finds is actually in Arabic, so it's not even in Spanish. It's gone from its original transmission through translation but Cervantes can't read Arabic, so he has to get it translated. So he brings it to an Arab who translates it for him, and now apparently he's telling the story based on the translation of this earlier manuscript. So a lot of different layers and editorial processes are involved.
And none of it's true.
None of it's true.
Cervantes makes it all up, but he says, oh, I found this, and then had to get it translated. And so not only can Cervantes say, oh, I'm distancing myself from this whole thing, he can create this rich history of it that gives it an appearance of reliability.
And it is the way that a lot of ancient manuscripts, Aristotle, that sort of thing, were reintroduced into the medieval and early modern world through translations into Arabic that preserved those ancient texts. So he's actually imitating life.
Yeah. Yeah, and in the introduction, he does the same thing, and in a story within a story, because he says, well, I couldn't really write an introduction, so I had to find a friend, and I might as well just quote him. And so that's another layer.
And the friend just gives him all of this advice, including this is fascinating. This friend, and this is in 1605, his buddy quotes for him essentially the aesthetic mandate of the novel. Right? He says, your job is not to dabble in philosophy, in theology. All you have to do is imitate life. Just copy life, and that's the substance of your art. And that really is what fiction is all about. That's how fiction goes after truth. So this is the reason why this novel, written in 1605, became really popular in the 20th century, because there's a kind of hump that we go through. In the 1800s, novels are super realistic, and the author doesn't want to call attention to himself. He wants to plunge you in and make you believe that it's all real. But early novels and later novels were much more self-conscious about their storytelling. So there's a sense in which Cervantes feels like a very contemporary author in the way that he does his storytelling.
And part of the story being so unrealistic, right, that he would say, oh, I'm going to imitate life how it really is. And the whole story is about how life really isn't.
Right.
But he's saying this is how life really is that we see the world in ways that don't really comport with reality. We're self-deceivers, we deceive others, we bring others into our messes. We think we're stamping out injustice when in fact we're
making it worse.
We're making it worse. We do all these things, and yet there's something good about the pursuit of truth, pursuit of seeing the world well. Idealism. Don Quixote is not a particularly unsympathetic character at all. In fact, he's a very sympathetic character. So we don't read this book and go, the fool, he's ruining the world. We go, he has high ideals. He's trying to do something high and lofty. And boy, he's going about it the wrong way. Why? Because he's treating fiction as history. He's seeing justice as injustice, injustice as justice. He's seeing prostitutes as damsels. He's seeing innkeepers as he has the view of reality that he's basing his life on is fundamentally flawed.
And I think because of the humor and because you identify with Don Quixote, Cervantes is really asking you, aren't you the same way? Don't you have ideals that you think that you embody and you really don't? Don't you occasionally make situations worse when you're trying to make them better? Isn't it because you don't really see yourself for what you are, and you don't really see the world for what it is?
Yeah. So that's a good thing to think about as you read the book. What's he telling us about himself, about ourselves? What's he trying to do here with the themes that he lays out so humorously for us? Thanks.
I just want to point out, in our earlier video, it looked like I didn't know what a lance is called, and I called it a jousting pole, and some people, my foil, thought that was ridiculous, but actually, I think if you go back to the Arab manuscript of that conversation, you'll find literally jousting pole is what was there.
Not lance. Lance was a creation.
That's the English translation
from later translations.
Right.
Well,
so
thanks for
I was just
taking us back. Authentic, vintage,
metafictional.
Well, Mark Bertrand, thanks for being with us. Always great to have him in literature class. Sorry we couldn't do it in person. Mark Bertrand's a novelist and author, Worldview faculty colleague from Sioux Falls, South Dakota. So we will see you guys later.
Yeah.
See you, Mark.
Stay warm and keep reading.